Hi, welcome to Spiritual Connection. I'm your host, Katie Augustyn. So I'm a spiritual energy healer, I'm a shamanic practitioner, and I'm a transformation coach. And one of my core values is connection, and it shows up in many areas of my life. And that's really the reason I wanted to start the show, Spiritual Connection. So we can connect with each other as well as connect more fully with our own spiritual selves. So thank you for joining me tonight. And as you know, I have a different guest on every show. And tonight I'm very pleased to welcome Scott Lewis. Welcome to the show, Scott.
How are you, Katie?
I'm great.
Thanks for having me.
It's so nice for you to be here and finally meet you in person. You know, we've talked on the phone a few times. And Scott lives up in the Avon area. And he is a professional real estate broker, and he owns his own real estate company called Lewis Real Estate Services in Avon and also in Wallingford, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So he came down tonight to be on the show. And I was really eager to have him because I think not only does Scott have an inspirational story that I think we can all learn from, but he really epitomizes the qualities of perseverance as well as the spiritual awakening that we're going to talk about, right?
Sure.
Yeah, it sounds great. I'm really happy you're here.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's very interesting about our connection is that we have a friend in common, as it turns out, Ruth Sello.
Yes.
And you're going to hear a little bit about Scott's story in a minute, but I'll just give you a little foreshadowing of it. And it's not, this part is not a happy part because he was wrongfully convicted of a crime he did not commit and served 20 years in prison before he was exonerated and worked very hard to get himself exonerated. Yes. And Ruth met him in prison.
Yes, that's where we met.
Yeah, because she was working with everybody there.
Yeah.
What was she doing exactly?
Her and her husband, Dick, they had the Thresholds program. And what Thresholds was about teaching people how to make good decisions, which was well needed. And exposing to individuals that there's actually steps to making good decisions.
Wow.
And that part of the class that they taught was really a critical part in, me becoming who I am today. In terms of understanding that there's steps in life to get from one point to another, and each step is very important. So.
And that was something that you had not been aware of or learned when you were younger?
I think that a lot of people, you take it for granted that there's a process to being successful or there's a process to becoming who you're meant to become. And sometimes we underestimate that process and we don't pay attention to that process the way we should when we're in a world that has so many distractions. So I think being in prison allowed me to kind of channel that, those processes, and be aware of the importance of them to my life because there were no outside distractions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. All right, so we're definitely going to hear more about that process and that journey that you had. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your present? What are you up to now?
So I currently, as you indicated in the beginning, I started my own real estate company, Lewis Real Estate Services. I've been a broker now for 2 years. I've been a real estate agent for 4 years. But I started when I was 23 years old, back in 1988. I started on the path of becoming a real estate agent. Because I realized at that time that I wanted to do something with my life that affected people in a positive way. But at the same time, I was transforming out of a lifestyle that had affected people in a negative way. So those two worlds were colliding, and I was just discovering who I was becoming as a young man at that particular time.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So was this prior to going to prison?
Yeah. So like you said, that connection, it was already there.
Okay.
And as sometimes when you're living life, right, and you're destined to go to another journey, there may be a challenge or obstacle to test if you're really made or if you really have what it takes to get to that next that next step. So I call that the purging of the impurities that are around you. So it took going to prison, it took enduring this unfortunate circumstance that happened to me to sharpen, who I really was as a person. So when I went through the endurance process of being wrongfully imprisoned, the only thing that was natural to me was to go back to where I was already on the process of becoming, back into real estate. It's because it's something I already knew. It's something that I was pursuing. Obviously, there was a 20-year delay in there, but the purpose of me and the motivation of me wanting to become a real estate agent was the sole purpose of helping people. So that never went away. But I just matured during that 20 years of in prison. And I matured spiritually. So that's when spirituality became real to me. Because at that particular time, I was broken. I was sent to prison. I was given a 240-year sentence. A lot of people looked at it like, my life was over. And that sometimes I felt that way, that my life, it was pretty much, here I am, 25 years old, burdened with a 240-year sentence. It was like, either I'm going to die or I'm going to really wake up and want to live. And I made the decision to wake up and want to live.
Yeah.
And when I made that decision, the spirituality became very real to me. It wasn't just something I had knowledge of. It was something I literally had to practice day in and day out and become strong in that spirituality, which led me to winning my freedom.
Oh, where you are now.
Yeah.
So what do you think came first? The acceptance of, spirituality and the spiritual side of you before the decision to go on with your life, or do you think which? So
I think that, if you look at it from a biblical sense, right, and you say, God, whoever you call God, the Most High created all things to be good, right? So I just think that there's goodness in everyone. But then sometimes, the environments that you grow up in, the circumstances that you're around, there comes a little badness that kind of chokes out that goodness. So I think it started, obviously it starts to me when one is first born, right? And these good qualities are there, they're instilled in you, and sometimes you can lose them because you don't kind of take care of the garden. I would say the weeds kind of grow up and the weeds choke the good part of an individual out because of whatever pressures they may be under, environmentally wise, or the neighborhoods they grow up with, or the challenges their families are facing. Sometimes you lose that goodness and you become somebody who you're not, right? And that's what happened to me. And I started making bad decisions. And as a result of those bad decisions, I ended up, becoming a target or subjected to being put in prison for something I didn't do. And it became really easy for the police and the people that wanted to destroy you to do that because you were already perceived as somebody that wasn't good because of the decisions that you were making. So it was really easy for them to sell a story to 12 juries or to a larger public that, this individual is no good. These are the decisions he's making and they're destructive to society. And to some degree, they're right. You make bad decisions and you do things that are not uplifting to other human beings, then you are playing a negative role into society. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily mean that individual, talking to myself, didn't have a sense of good in them, right?
Right, of course.
It's just that at that particular time, I wasn't nurturing that side of it.
Right, it wasn't evident. What people saw was more of the detrimental side of it.
Well, you have to feed that, just like you have spirituality, but you have to feed it. You have to feed it to become strong in it, to allow you to resist the temptations that are out there that try to rob you of who your true self or your true person are, or the potential that you have in you to really become.
So you were able to incorporate spiritual practices into your everyday life?
Well, I think I was forced to, Because like I said, when I was sentenced to 240 years, it was like, do you want to die or do you want to live?
That's a good wake-up call, isn't
And
it?
if you want to live, then, this is the roadway to life. The scripture tells us this is the path to life, this is the path to death. So you're faced in a situation where you're not dead, but you might as well be dead. You're 24, 240 years in prison. So you have a chance to make that choice again, right? So this time I just chose to, the path that I wanted to live. And the first step was making sure that people's lives that you touched them in a way that were edifying to them and that were good for them, not something that was destructive to them, right?
Like what? What's an example of that?
Sometimes just an encouraging word.
So while you were in prison, you were that role model for other people?
When I was in prison, I just realized, like I said, I had 240 years. I had really very limited help. And I knew that the spiritual law says, well, if you want to be blessed, you have to be a blessing to others. So I had to look for a way to be blessings to other individuals that were in situations that I were in order to reap blessings that I desperately needed because of the situation I was in. So just small things, just kind gestures. Like I said, I had a 240-year sentence. I might see a younger guy. He comes in, he might be, 18, 19, 20 years old. He has, 5 years sentence or 8 years sentence. And he was giving up on life right then and there. And I would just say to him, listen, man, you have another chance. You have an opportunity to go home in 3 or 4 years. Take this terrible situation you're in and just use it to improve yourself.
Wow.
Find out who you are so you don't have to come back to this. Make better decisions in your life. And then I would use myself as an example. I said, here I am. I may not get the chance to go home at all to my family. You got 5 years. Work on yourself.
It's really good advice.
Become a better person.
Especially for the younger people who need that guidance. Maybe he didn't have that at home.
Well, it goes back to my old self. I am embarrassed to say, at one point in time, I used to deal drugs. And you would entice or encourage young people, hey, you want some money? Here, sell some drugs. So, that was the bad part. That was the negative things that I was doing in the community. And they were self-destructing to myself and self-destructive to other people's lives.
So you were making up for that.
I had to change that. That's just not who, I was inside. It was more of a, here were my circumstances, this is the environment I was growing in. I didn't really see another way out. And it just made me realize that that's not the way I wanted to live my life. That's not the effect that I wanted to have on people.
So Scott, when did you start the process of exonerating yourself? Because you knew all along, obviously, that you were innocent and you were convicted wrongly. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
That was day one. I remember being adjudicated guilty.
Were you just surprised that this happened in the first place?
Yeah, because you go into the system and you believe that the truth will set you free, right? That's the one time that you say, if the Bible says it, make it happen. It's going to work,
Because you knew you were innocent, but...
You believe that the justice system is going to work. And then what I found out is when prosecutors get cases and when police officers make arrests, the person that's arrested is automatically presumed guilty, even though they say you're innocent until proven guilty. But when you watch TV and somebody gets arrested, the first thing that comes to your mind is, he's guilty, why did he do it? What was the senseless act that this individual done? Why did he do something so senseless? So it's easy to get caught up into that. In the public perception is that you're guilty, period. So the trial process is not whether or not you're innocent. The trial process is whether or not you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, because everybody has already formed a perception once you was arrested that you were guilty. Right?
Guilty of something, if not
even
precisely.
Even if it was guilty of something, right? The court process was just validating the perception that was already set in motion when the individual is arrested, period. So a lot of people go into that, and when I went into that as an innocent person, I was like, well, the justice system's going to work. The jury's gonna hear the truth, they're gonna hear the facts, and they're gonna see that I'm an innocent person. But then that's theoretical, right?
Yeah.
The practice of it, with prosecutors, they go out to try to get a conviction. They don't really care about the truth. What they care about is selling the jury a perception that's going to lead to a result of a conviction. Whether that means they got to hide evidence, or whether that means they got to manipulate evidence, whatever it is, in that courtroom, it's about winning and losing. The truth is lost, right? And that's on both sides, because I had lawyers saying, well, I don't think the prosecutors could do this. They won't establish a reasonable doubt. And I'm saying, I'm not trying to establish a reasonable doubt. I'm trying to establish my innocence. Reasonable doubt has nothing to do with this. I'm innocent.
Right, but that's their job to do.
But the courts, when you get arrested and you go through this process, they don't allow you to put on evidence of innocence. They only allow you to put on evidence that can create a reasonable doubt. Because the jury is never asked to determine whether or not you are actually innocent. They're just asked to determine whether you're guilty or not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So the question of innocence is never even put before the jury, right? So these are things that obviously I didn't know until I went through it. But when I look at it now, and I look at the justice system now, and you follow any trial, they ask, guilty or not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They never ask the jury to reach a conclusion as to whether somebody's innocent.
Yeah.
Because innocence is not even on the table at that trial process. And that's the flaw of the criminal justice system.
So you felt like you just got caught up in the system and basically got railroaded? Is that a term that
you get caught up in the system, and the public already has a perception that you're guilty. So the prosecutors are protecting the public perception. But in my opinion, that's injustice, right? Because I believe that when you talk about justice, people need to be litigating toward what's the truth, right? Because there were a lot of victims. You have the victim's family. If you get the wrong person, the victim family suffer twice, because not only did something happen that is, egregious and just outrageous to their loved ones, but now you're not even prosecuting the right person.
Oh, yeah.
So that's like a double injustice, So when I was fighting my case, in the spirit of, one, proving myself innocent, proving that, one, my mother did not raise the type of man that they made me out to be. So I was fighting for her. And two, I even took on the fights for the victim's family, because I believed that they needed to know the truth as well. So what that led me to do was to litigate and fight with not trying to establish my innocence beyond a reasonable doubt, but to establish my innocence beyond any factual doubt. Yeah. And not only that, try to get to the bottom of who actually committed the case, who committed the crime. Wow. So it was a rough course. I was treated really unjustly by state officials. And then, some of the lawyers at that particular time were trying to take me left, and I wanted to go right, so I ended up litigating on my own behalf for like 10 or 15 years. So
you represented yourself, and you did all this while you were in prison?
While I was in prison.
You have access to what you needed in terms of, I don't know,
so one thing I learned,
research?
One thing I learned about spiritual energy, it's like there can be as many obstacles as evil forces want to put out there. But if you're operating in spirit and truth, those obstacles are not going to stop the truth from coming out, right? So I found myself in a situation where I was fighting against all odds, and the resources that I had available to me were very limited. But I found myself, when I was being good to people, good things were happening to me. Things were just falling in place.
Isn't that amazing how
it
that
was
works?
just falling in place. And so the spiritual power became very real, like the healing power. It became very real to me.
Did you pray a lot at that time? Or?
I pray, but the way I define prayer is just living my life in a way that's edifying to people I touch.
Yeah, so
right?
just exemplifying what you believe.
And looking for positive, positive results. Always seeing the positive out of a situation. That was my prayer. Obviously, you need help that's greater than yourself, and you request to that, and you acknowledge that there's a higher power other than yourself. But that prayer is a walking prayer. That's a prayer that you're walking with, 24/7. It's not like I take 5 minutes and bow on my knees and I pray, and then you leave it behind.
You're living it. It became who you were and who you are.
Yeah.
That's clear to me. It comes across very clear that you exemplify that. So that was quite a journey for you, but
it was tough.
And it took 20 years.
Yeah.
And then how did they decide to exonerate you?
So what happened? Like I said, I was litigating on my own, and I was also walking in spiritual energy. I'm just saying, the Most High is guiding me. So I don't care what anyone else is saying. I believe in what the spiritual energy is telling me about my situation, about my body, that I will walk out of here.
Okay.
I couldn't see the physical part of it, but I just believed it.
So you had the faith.
That's the only thing that kept me alive. Otherwise, I would have no reason to get up and comb the hair that left me. But nevertheless, you get up, you take care of yourself, because I'm preparing myself for this moment, because I know what's going to happen.
It's amazing.
And so what happened is, as I was going through the state system, I was going now into the federal court system. And I always knew that I had to get to federal court in order to get a true sense of justice. Because in the federal level, there's not as much political stuff that goes on, at least in regards to the criminal justice system. In the state system, there's a lot of politics, because judges are appointed, and most judges that are appointed were former prosecutors, and prosecutors have a large say-so in judges that get reappointed. So it became very political. And judges, even if they wanted to do the right thing, were afraid to do the right thing, because they didn't know if they would get renominated, because sometimes doing the right thing, you will be offending the public on a large level. Federal judges, on the other hand, they have lifetime appointments. So it's easier for them to make a decision that people might be shocking to other people's thing without their careers being jeopardized, right? Because they have that. So that's the difference between the state system and the federal system. So I said I have to get to the federal system, get the truth before somebody that can be honorable, and they can make a decision based on the evidence, as opposed to whether or not they're going to get reappointed because they piss somebody off. So that's what I just kept fighting to that journey. I got there. The federal judge appointed Yale Law School, Professor Brett Dingham. So I found myself swimming by myself, just exercising my faith, just continually getting up, trying to be a better person every day, helping people the way I can in a positive way, to ending up now with like 50 law students, at my side, championing my cause.
So he appointed them?
Yeah, he appointed the Yale Law School, Brett Dingham.
The whole law school.
She came with a team of students, so to speak. And they picked up my cause, and they didn't try to go left. We continued the same way I was going through the state system, the same arguments. We just had to take it to a higher court. And we finally was able to get a judge to do the right thing.
So did it have to be retried, or the judge just vacated the...
Well,
whatever?
so the judge in the federal court, what the judge do, because Bill Clinton in this, I think it was 95 somewhere, they passed this law where it made it harder for people to get federal relief. So the federal judge had to defer to the state courts in regards to a lot of the state court rulings. But the state courts had screwed up so much, it became so obvious. It wasn't hard to see that they messed up. And a lot of that was evident because I was representing myself, so they probably didn't even believe I had the intelligence to take it to the next level. Where I was already saying to myself, they're wrong, I'm right, I know what exactly I'm doing, let me just stay on course. Let me not focus on what the state judges are ruling on, because I know what their rulings are saying is incorrect in regards to federal law.
Kept persevering on the track you knew was
and because
the right
they were
way to
intentionally denying me justice, it became so easy for the federal courts to say, you offended the Constitution.
So they stepped in when they needed to.
They stepped in. They didn't have to defer to the state court rulings because they weren't even close to being right.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the hardest part. That was the hardest part to get over.
Wow. And then once the Yale Law students took your case and helped you, then they did a documentary about it.
Yeah.
Which is
We're literally,
pretty
we have a
amazing.
screening tomorrow at Wellesley in Massachusetts tomorrow. Yeah.
So is it widely available, the documentary?
That's a good question. I think the students keep it under wrap, and they keep it toward, wherever we do screenings.
Okay.
I don't think you can like Google it and just,
watch it on YouTube.
Watch it on YouTube.
But what's the name of it?
It's called 120 Years.
120 years.
Yeah.
Because that was
that's
one of your sentences.
Well, what happened is I got sentenced to 240 years.
Uh-huh.
This was, if I ever got mad, it was at this point. So when I was originally sentenced, I was sentenced to 120 years running consecutive to 120 years for a total effective sentence of 240 years. So I went to the state Supreme Court. We argued that the sentence was illegal. The state Supreme Court agreed that the sentence was illegal, ordered the local court to resentence me, vacate 120 years, and it should only be a 120-year sentence. So I went in. This was all procedural stuff because that really didn't matter to me. It's like, what's the difference between 200 and 120 years? I'm still in prison. Yeah. I'm trying to get to the truth here. Right. But anyway, I went to court, and the judge, I should know this judge's name by heart, but I don't hold any animosity. I can't remember who he is, but I know who he is, right? The judge had the nerve to say to me, Scott, Mr. Lewis, you should be happy that the judge, this Supreme Court overturned your conviction and reversed your sentence from 240 years to 120 years. Today is a good day for you. He literally had the nerve to say that to me in the courtroom, as if I was supposed to be happy that my sentence got reduced from 240 years to 120
stop what you're doing,
years.
just give up and settle for that or something.
I was just like, these people are out of their mind. How can you? Don't even call me in the court for something like this.
Yeah, it seems a little ludicrous.
And it was just really like, the way I took it is like, he was saying to me, you're not going home ever. And, how can you say you should be happy that your sentence got reversed from 240 years to 120
Maybe
years?
that spurred you on.
How can you literally sit there and tell another human that you should be happy that just happened?
Yeah, that's offensive. But your anger helped you do even more.
It just really pissed me off. I was like, these people don't know who they're messing with. They just think I'm going to kind of like put my head on, tuck my head and feel victimized. I just said it's not going to happen. Like you said, it made me fight even harder. Yeah, it just energized me even more so.
I think it's remarkable what you did, what you accomplished, but it really exemplifies, like I said at the beginning, that perseverance. Knowing who you are, that's what comes across to me. Like you knew in your heart that you weren't that person.
That's
well,
right.
Number one, clearly you weren't the person that committed that crime, but you also weren't the person who started down the wrong path.
Right.
You knew
that
you had a better life in front of you.
Like I said, the good part of you sometimes can get drowned in front of you.
Yeah.
One of the most empowering things, as you bring that up, is it's like when I told my mom, and I was, I got, convicted and going through trial, and she goes, Scott, I know, because you're my son, I know that there's no way you could have done anything like this. She said, but you do have to face the fact that you were making bad decisions and you put yourself in a situation for people to do this to you by the choices that you were making. That was like the toughest pill I had to swallow, but it was the truth.
Right.
So I had to, so when you say the truth will set you free, that means you got to accept your faults as well. Accept your shortcomings as well and acknowledge that, and then you're able to become that better person. Because if you're in denial of that fact, then you're not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I had to accept that part of who I was at that particular time of my life and the decisions I was making in order to move forward.
That's really important.
Yeah, that was
it sounds like
key.
you're in a good place now. You have a family.
Oh yes. I'm in a much better place.
Yeah.
Things still have to get better. I'm still working on it. I have older kids now that are it's hard to. You can't get those relationships back in 20 to 25 years.
I see.
It's just really hard, Right. But I do have a 2-year-old now.
Oh, that's great. Congratulations.
I'm newly married, and things are going great. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. I feel
know,
like we could
I
talk all
you,
night. You're right. You're right. So thank you for being here, and thanks to all of you for watching tonight. I'm your host, Katie Augustyn, Spiritual Connection. Blessings and good night.
Good night.